Welcome, everyone. Thank you for attending today's webcast, Preventing Financial Crime Through Collaboration. My name is Karin Rines, and I'm the Marketing Manager for the Customer and Third-Party Risk Business at Refinitiv, and I will be your webinar host today. Before we begin, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping items. Now, the webcast is being streamed through your computer. Make sure your computer speakers or headset are turned on and the volume is turned up. Click on the live stream media player on your screen to enable the sound. And if your screen freezes up, simply refresh your browser. You can expand the slide area or minimize or maximize the full screen console by clicking on the arrow in the top right corner of the slide window. Please submit your questions in the Q&A box that is on your screen. Our presenters will answer as many questions as they can during the last 10 to 15 minutes of the webcast. And finally, answers to some of the technical issues that you might encounter can be found by clicking on the Help widget, which is the question mark icon in the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. Also available in the toolbar are complete speaker bios, a list of articles and resources that our panelists have provided that are downloadable and accessible to you all. Our presenters today are Shay Sedanius, Head of Financial Crime Regulation and Industry Affairs for Refinitiv, Roni Hong, who is CEO at the FreedomSeal Global, Sasha Lesnev, Deputy Director of Policy at the Sentry, and Ben Spivak, who is a Senior Analyst at C4 ADS. We've got a lot to cover today, so I am going to turn it over to Shay to introduce our panelists further and get the presentation underway. Shay?
Thank you very much, Karen, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. From what I understand, the attendance, the registration of this event has reached a record from all the numbers that we can look at. So it's a fantastic testament to not only the speakers, but the topic. Is what I'm hoping to do now is really to introduce our speakers a bit more and then tee up the topic around collaboration and how it can increase the amount of collaboration, what needs to be done to fight financial crime more effectively. So just to tee it up very briefly before I turn attention to our speakers. There's no question that the topic of money laundering and how to fight it, both how to address the regulatory regime, the enforcement actions that are being taken by the supervisors, and also the emergence of new topics that maybe historically, traditionally, really haven't been the focus of enforcement regimes. And I'm referring specifically to human rights and labor rights issues. We all know that in the European Union, there's unprecedented regulatory change underway. We also know that in the US, there's a significant change underway as well in terms of understanding and focusing on the regulatory focus as far as due diligence is concerned. And we also know that many different enforcement agencies are taking very aggressive actions against what they see are violations of modern-day slavery topics and labor rights issues. So what we're hoping to do today is share with you some of the perspectives from industry specialists on these topics. I cannot be more delighted to introduce again Roni Hong, the CEO of the FreedomSeal, former UN Special Advisor, and also a former victim of human trafficking herself. We're also invited here with Sasha, Deputy Director of the Sentry, who spends quite a bit of work on looking at corruption and the impact that has on modern-day slavery, and especially in the region of sub-Saharan Africa. And also Ben as well to talk about some of the tools that they have available on these issues. So let me do this first. If I could ask each of our speakers to spend 5 or 10 minutes to give opening remarks, then what we'll do is we'll open up the questions, which will probably leave us about a half hour or so. And so I encourage you to submit questions in the chat. We'll make sure that we try to capture them as we go along. And if we can't capture them or address them, certainly within this webinar, then we'll do the best to address them afterwards via a written response. So Roni, let me please welcome you again. It's great to see you. And if I could ask you to talk about some of the efforts, and especially the FreedomSeal in particular, to look at some of the due diligence efforts and processes and tools that you have available in order to address and really to promote collaboration on this topic. Please, Roni, over to you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Shay, for the introduction, and good morning to everybody. I'm here based in the Seattle, Washington, so morning. But I really appreciate everybody coming and learning about this issue. It says a lot with the number of people we have. So I want to tell you a little bit of myself. I am Roni, and I'm now today the CEO of FreedomSeal Global. And really my focus is to helping world-changing companies, several of them of you here in the audience. I want to help lead the way to prevent forced labor in the supply chains. FreedomSeal is a global mark trust awarded to companies that are effectively taking action to eradicate modern-day slavery. And the partnership with Refinitiv and others really enables FreedomSeal to be help lead the way in helping with due diligence. And with the World Check and Risk Intelligence data, we screen suppliers and vendors on behalf of the clients to identify potential connection to human trafficking. We all know of this crime of human trafficking is 40 million people around the world, but $150 billion industry. So that's a huge criminal crime from criminal networks. So the partnership that FreedomSeal Global, it enables us to use data as one of the key parts to do our own independent certification process to assist our clients to determine where there may be any links to modern day slavery, and to help put policies in place to minimize such risks, right? Today, we need to take that proactive step. As Shay said, the EU legislation and the US government and now other governments are coming around to enforce the legislation and saying we must do something to prevent forced labor. So our goal at FreedomSeal is to aid in the implementation of human rights due diligence according to the UN principles on business and human rights and to the OECD guidelines, the multinational enterprises, and publicly. FreedomSeal is here to publicly reward those who are making efforts to prevent forced labor. We are not saying it's slavery-free. What we are saying, and what we do want the world of companies to do, is to take proactive steps and be prepared. So the FreedomSeal certification signifies to the world your commitment to fighting this crime. It represents social justice for the estimated 40 million people, mostly women and children who are trapped into slavery. And I do come from a personal story, right? Of course, my childhood story of being sold into slavery, being kidnapped from my mother and taken over across borders where I did not know the language. Everything was unfamiliar to me. And I was sold to my trafficker. So I had firsthand experience going through this. And today I want to do everything I can to equip companies, governments, law enforcement to have the right tools to prevent this. So through our annual certification, you'll take if you go through our process and follow our guidelines and meet our criteria, you can earn the FreedomSeal, and it is equivalent with a lot of the legislation as said. As far as why the use of FreedomSeal certification. And it is an emblem you can use on promotion materials if you choose to tell the world what you're doing with concrete action. Today, we're talking about taking concrete action, not just to read about it on paper, but to do good. And that's what FreedomSeal rewards those who could evidence what they're doing. So there's a lot of good benefits, as we know, having a strong brand image is huge today. It just takes a minute to destroy a brand if you are caught having forced labor in your products. So again, our certification can be, we give a report at the end as you go through the certification, and you can utilize that tool as well. And we're talking about a journey, right? We have to move forward in a journey to drive positive change. It's not overnight fix, but it is something that we can all work towards. Again, the end goal is to save millions of children's lives, like the little girl I was, imprisoned, enslaved, and unable to speak. But today, we all have an opportunity to do something. So as we continue on this panel here, I look forward to my colleagues talking about the issue more. I encourage our listeners who are from the governments to reach out to FreedomSeal, reach out to us so we can help you with our technology, help you with customer due diligence, screening, a lot of things there. And again, the partnership with Refinitiv really does allow us to carry that voice worldwide. And today's event is about collaboration, talking about collaboration. How can we join with others? Not being competitive, putting competition to the side, but how can we collaborate those who are doing good? And several on this panel, of course, is an example of that. So there are a lot of benefits, and I'm going to end here as time is coming up. But just really, and then also I just do want to reach out. I'm here in the U.S., and the U.S. government has really taken action. And yes, the U.S. Customs and Border Protection is now detaining products that have been tainted by forced labor. So it gives a huge message. It gives the message to the world: we must do something to stop products being made. So anyways, I think that's it for me there, Shay, and I'm going to hand this over to now Sasha.
Thank you so much, Roni. And just to reemphasize that beyond the regulatory focus and the policy focus, of course, we've heard from the industry that there's an expectation, of course, by the customers and the buyers of the products for companies to be much more diligent in this space. So that very much speaks to the FreedomSeal. And I will be remiss to mention that we will share all these slides with you, and there are more slides, in fact, than we could share with you on this presentation, but all that will be made available. So, Sasha, on that note, let's focus on the collaboration aspect, and I also note of the incredible work that the Sentry is doing, and you specifically of being one of the founding members of the Public and Private Alliance on Responsible Minerals Trade, as an example. So if I can, ask you to share your views in terms of what does good look like? What do you think is needed? What do you think the challenges are? And how do we encourage more cooperation across the public and the private sector? Please, Sasha, over to you.
Great. Thanks so much. Well, first of all, I will try to do my best George Clooney impression. He's our co-founder, and sorry that he's not here today, but I'll do my best to keep you entertained. But in seriousness, thank you so much, Che and Karin, for organizing this webinar on this very important topic. I'm really honored to be part of this inspiring panel, and also really excited about the Sentry's new partnership with Refinitiv. I just wanted to start out by saying, look, modern slavery, wildlife trafficking, armed conflict are continuing in so many ways because they are profitable for certain networks. I'd like to give some concrete examples of how companies and governments can combat this profitability through some concrete steps, and also highlight some new opportunities. So just to give two examples of the problem right off the bat: conflict gold, an area we've done a lot of work on, funds obviously war, child soldiering, and corruption in multiple places, from Venezuela to Sudan to the Central African Republic. A study that we recently put out said that over $4 billion worth of conflict-affected and high-risk gold is coming from Central and East Africa each year, flowing to international markets, and it's not consumed locally. It's going to the United States, Europe, and globally. Then on the wildlife side, you look at the elephant or pangolin populations that are being decimated. There were 128 tons of pangolin scales that were intercepted at latest count in 2019. And the elephant population in the Democratic Republic of Congo, for example, has gone down by 75% over the last 2 decades. So what do these areas have or what do these trades have in common that is relevant for companies and things that the companies can take action on? It's really these this middle tier, not the end of the chain where there's a lot of action going on, but maybe not that much transparency, or the very beginning of the chain, like at national parks or at mines that are being certified. But these sort of middle tier countries that are transit hubs for trafficking of conflict commodities or wildlife are a critical, highly profitable part of the chain, and where there's not as much attention being paid. So for conflict gold, for example, you have Uganda, Rwanda, Cameroon, Dubai, UAE. For wildlife trafficking, you again have Uganda, but also Tanzania, Thailand, Malaysia, other countries. What's really needed to solve this? They're both public and private opportunities, but also this nexus I'll get to in a second. So number one is consequences. So for the illicit actors, and importantly, their networks. You have on the public side, of course, sanctions, which are really critical, and not just against one individual, but the entire networks. Number two is sort of public sector financial pressure. So anti-money laundering measures such as the 311s or the 314As under the Patriot Act, very important. But corporate actions as well, so critical to stemming this, and can often act so much more swiftly and more effectively than a slow-moving Congress or administration. The conflict-free audits that the electronics industry and the gold industry have set up, making sure that refiners and smelters of certain minerals are going through those audits and failing the companies that really cannot pass. Also sourcing decisions, very critical. So, are the end user companies who are consuming products that may be conflict commodities like conflict gold, are they actually sourcing from the conflict-free refineries? Very, very important. A few, Apple, Google, have done so, but many others have not. Or a range of AML actions by financial institutions. I'll just give one quick example here. Israeli tycoon Dan Gertler, who, according to the Treasury Department, engaged in extensive public corruption and amassed his fortune through hundreds of millions of dollars of mining and oil deals that were opaque and corrupt. He was sanctioned 4 years ago in 2017, and then given a license at the last minute that effectively negated the sanctions at the beginning of this year. Well, finally, after significant public pressure from the Sentry, Global Witness, and other NGOs, as well as Congress, the Biden administration put those sanctions back and removed the license just last month. So there's some success, and that enables critical anti-corruption reforms to get back on track in Congo. It also creates a deterrent effect, and it's also a good marker for what could happen over the next 4 years with this administration. Banking actions were also critical to this. This is not only a public effort. We learned that banks frequently refused in that interim period when he had the license to actually unfreeze the assets of his companies. So that was very important. Last week, also, for example, a group of senators called for sanctions on key actors involved in the illicit trade in conflict gold. So there's more to do, clearly. And then reforms by companies and governments. So in public and private partnerships are key to this. So, for example, reporting requirements for companies that they should require proof of payment for gold being imported, or requirement of disclosure of beneficial owners of certain companies, or all extractive companies, for example, or the tax harmonization to stop incentivize smuggling. So what do companies need to know to watch out for in their supply chains on some of these issues? So number one, there's, I would say, high-risk refiners. There have been nearly 30 refineries set up in sub-Saharan Africa over the last 5 years. None of them, apart from a couple in South Africa, have passed independent or undergone independent conflict-free audits. And many of these refiners do not report to the financial intelligence units, which should be a requirement. So that's a red flag. Also, red flags such as large cash transactions, which continue in the gold sphere. Gold originating in countries, in particular this middle country area middle country category that I mentioned, where there's almost no gold production, right? And you have these massive amounts of gold coming out where there's almost no domestic gold production. Likewise, timber shipments that all of a sudden are including wildlife, so irregularities with those timber shipments. And then Che, you were asking about what sorts of partnerships, what sorts of public-private collaboration can be useful here. There's a range of things. So I think from our experience, public-private meetings, letters, even op-eds can be very helpful. With the Public-Private Alliance on Responsible Minerals Trade, we did meetings with undersecretaries of state to highlight the key actions that are needed on the conflict minerals trade, together with major electronics companies. It was too sort of hot for them to write a letter or an op-ed, so we did a meeting. Likewise, dialogues with civil society groups such as a Sentry, FreedomSeal, C4ADS, and others that have key information on trafficking networks to help share information. We dialogue frequently with large banks on these issues. I think a third one is if companies can support alternatives to illegally trafficked commodities. So, for example, there's a burgeoning responsible conflict-free gold trade in East and Central Africa that needs support. They need a market. They need support to seed money to get their efforts off the ground, et cetera. And even support to prosecutors who are working on wildlife trafficking, et cetera. There's a new wildlife trafficking court in Uganda, for example, that would benefit from provision of information. A couple of examples are the Public-Private Alliance for Responsible Minerals Trade. We helped, together with a range of companies and governments, help reduce excess taxes on minerals. We made some progress on the minerals certification system. There's also a UN sanctions committee on more or less most of the sensitive countries that the illegally trafficked materials are coming from. It's possible to meet with those sanctions committees and provide information. We have regular dialogues with them and are trying to set up actually some public-private meetings with them as well. There's also something called the Responsible Artisanal Gold Solutions Forum, which is, again, a public-private sector initiative. It also includes the jewelry industry. We helped the group lead to the first conflict-free ever gold export from the Democratic Republic of Congo to the United States. So, and we're recommending some actions for the UN Security Council along those lines as well. So I've probably gone beyond my 5 minutes. So thank you very much, Jay and Karen, and hand it over to Ben. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sasha. George Clooney or not, you did the Sentry incredibly proud with your presentation, and so do give him our regards. That your input is incredibly valuable here. And I know that we'll do a lot more work together. And just for complete transparency with everyone on the who's attending, we did form a partnership with the Sentry and the FreedomSeal, in fact, to try to bolster our capabilities. So we're big believers as a company on this question. And I guess before handing it over to you, Ben, to talk about some of the work that the C4ADS are doing. So we've talked about the importance of collaboration, of course, the importance of the need for data, and maybe you can share some of the work of your organization in trying to sift through the massive amounts of data in a way to structure it in a better way, and of course at the end of the day make it more actionable and to increase intelligence in a way that makes sense and that makes the whole regime much more effective. So Ben, if I can ask you for your opening remarks on those points specifically. Over to you.
Sure, and thank you for having me. I'll begin with some background on my organization, C4ADS, or sometimes we call it CADS, and then discuss two specific workflows we're applying to fight illicit activity, including financial crime. So C4ADS, we're a Washington, D.C.-based nonprofit. We're dedicated to providing data-driven analysis and evidence-based reporting on global conflict and transnational security issues. So that's sort of the byline. But more specifically, we use technology to analyze open data to help secure legal systems such as transportation or communication or finance from a host of issues, including money laundering, conflict finance, wildlife trafficking, narcotics, and forced labor. So our team works to map illicit networks and then empower partners who have the mandate to disrupt these activities. And to Sasha's point, one of the things we're hoping to do is shift that cost-benefit analysis to reduce the profitability of these operations. So C4IDS relies on 4 pillars. Those are people, data, technology, and partners. So looking at people, we have in-house fluency in over 15 critical languages. So the research we're able to conduct is almost always in the original source language, and we're able to offer this capability for ad hoc support of partner investigations or screening activities. We focus on fusing disparate data sources from multiple regions to create an aggregate database of searchable records for use in investigations or screening. And then in a similar vein, we build or adapt cutting-edge technology to serve the needs of our analysts or partners, again, acting as a force multiplier for investigative or screening activities. And finally, the partners themselves. We collaborate with government agencies, media outlets, advocacy organizations, and private sector companies and financial institutions to share our analysis and products with those organizations best poised to intervene. So with that background, I want to share with you 2 approaches that C4IDS takes to secure legal systems from illicit activity. Those are, number 1, by analyzing trends in predicate offenses to identify vulnerable infrastructure, and number 2, by shaping the data environment to empower the private sector and civil society to screen for illicit activity. So the first approach comes from a brief that was produced through the Routes Partnership, which is a USAID project aimed at partnering with private sector stakeholders to reduce trafficking in the aviation industry. And to your point, Shay, I think this is another good example of a public-private partnership against illicit activity. So this research is focused on wildlife and air transport specifically, but the concepts and the workflows could both be adapted to target financial crime. And so what you see on the screen here, wildlife trafficking, it abides by the same principles as other illicit activities in that it exploits legal systems of finance, communication, or transport, including aviation. But more precisely than that, it exploits vulnerabilities in legal systems, such as low enforcement capacity, regulatory loopholes, insider threats, that sort of thing. And that's important because multiple types of illicit trafficking activities can coalesce around the same vulnerabilities in a system. And that's a phenomenon we refer to as illicit convergence. So in the brief, we present 5 levels at which illicit convergence can occur. You can see those on the right. Those are shipment, organization, route, hub, and jurisdiction. And to give some examples of how these might apply to the financial sector, shipment convergence might be a transaction serving as payment for both drugs and weapons. Route convergence might be a common pathway through which both organized crime syndicates and sanctioned entities launder money. And hub convergence could be a bank account or a cryptocurrency wallet, but it could also be something higher level, like, say, a specific institution in an offshore banking jurisdiction that's been known to facilitate illicit activities for multiple groups. So to come back to the aviation industry in this brief specifically, we evaluated each of these convergence levels using 2 different data sets, C4IDS's internal database of wildlife seizures along air routes and the non-wildlife seizures from the World Customs Organization's Customs Enforcement Network database. So looking big picture, our most striking findings were of route and hub convergence. And you can see on the screen, between 2015 and 2019, over a third of air routes for known wildlife trafficking instances were also exploited to traffic non-wildlife illicit products. And in the same time period, about 2/3 of cities with significant wildlife trafficking activity, which we defined as 5 or more known trafficking instances, also reported non-wildlife air trafficking activities. So I'm happy to go into more detail about that data, but the bottom line is the data shows that illicit convergence does occur in the aviation sector. And in terms of solutions, adopting a holistic, collaborative approach to illicit exploitation of legal infrastructure can allow stakeholders to identify and remediate vulnerabilities, which will help secure these systems against multiple types of illicit activity. So in addition to this vulnerability remediation through trends analysis, a separate approach that we take is to apply publicly available information to develop screening databases for issue areas with scant or disparate official data. And so to talk about that, I'm going to describe C4ADS's screening database for politically exposed persons, PEPs. So one of the difficulties in PEP screening is that the state of data on PEPs globally is poor. So national authorities in many countries don't release information that's sufficient to determine the holdings of PEPs. Where countries do release substantial information, we'll often find that the data is either inconsistent in either content or formatting. And also the information contained in national databases doesn't interface well with other national databases, and that prevents anti-corruption researchers from drawing transnational links. So although this paints kind of a dim picture, there's actually a wealth of information out there that can be leveraged to determine the holdings of PEPs. So not just these nationally published lists, but things such as corporate or trade data, property records, aircraft or vehicle ownership logs, or other asset declarations. And to create an open data environment that will lower the time requirements for compliance officers or civil society to conduct screenings or investigations, which will in turn reduce the ability of criminal actors to exploit financial systems for illicit activity. So to this end, C4ADS is building a platform to facilitate financial compliance, due diligence, and investigations around PEPs. I think this can serve as a model not just for PEP screening, but for more broadly the leveraging of publicly available information to secure the financial system from illicit activity. So with this project, the goal is to house data within a replicable, flexible platform, somewhere where people can access the underlying documentation if they need that for their procedures, but everything is unified by a common ontology. So with this work, draws on previous C4ADS experience in developing similar platforms targeted at either anti-sanctions evasions or anti-corruption efforts. So the PEPs data is being collected, cleaned, and input into this consistent ontology in order to create this unified platform. And so this isn't just names and ID numbers, but addresses, phone numbers, corporate affiliations, and other identifying information from those types of records that we discussed above. Platforms can be leveraged by compliance officers or civil society or other relevant stakeholders to facilitate the screening and securing of the financial system. And looking more broadly, like I said, we can enrich these databases to also screen for identifying information linked to, for example, known human traffickers, or like Sasha was talking about, these high-risk refiners. So looking forward, 2 steps we would recommend to facilitate collaboration on these types of issues are, first, to enhance partnerships with investigative organizations, and that includes the legal frameworks that can allow for this type of engagement. So things like data sharing, that sort of thing. And number 2, to adopt a comprehensive approach to illicit activity. So not just having a, say, counter-wildlife task force, but to adopt this mindset of illicit activities more broadly, exploiting these legal systems, and to address them holistically. And so these 2 steps will allow us to grow the resources available to fight financial crime and to maximize the value of publicly available information in screening and investigations. So to sum it up, the solution in our mind is not to have every private sector entity stand up an investigative unit, but rather to harness external investigative capacity and publicly available information. And with that, I'll turn it back to Che.
Thank you very much, Ben. And that's a great opening remarks. And what we'll do is we'll turn to our Q&A. Would very much encourage all the attendees to send your questions across. We have a number of them already that's come in. And I'd like to focus on 2 specific ones to your point, Ben. The first is on this risk convergence aspect of it, which we as a company are promoters in terms of raising awareness that wildlife trafficking doesn't happen in isolation, modern day slavery doesn't happen in isolation, and neither does the conflict minerals or the transportation of conflict minerals. And so I'd like to sort of push that point a bit in terms of the data that you've seen, Ben, and maybe we can get Sasha's response as well on this. What are you seeing in terms of a different approach in looking at risk convergence as a different way of looking at risk management rather than just, individual silos or risk silos according to, the fact of predicate offenses. So what's your view on the risk convergence piece, if we can get your views on that?
Sure. So, one caveat that I do want to make is that, points of convergence in systems are not the only places, are not the only risks in a legal system. I mean, you might see, a hub, say an airport, that sees huge volumes of wildlife trafficking, but no other types of illicit activity. I mean, hypothetically, that could happen. The point that we would emphasize is if you're looking to triage enforcement efforts, identifying spots that are facilitating multiple types of illicit activity is not a bad place to start. And so, our analysis in that study was conducted using seizure data, and this is, in a sense, or sort of in a sentence, analysis is only as effective or relevant as the data that's put in. And so, seizure data, the pro of that is that we have, demonstrated concrete illicit activity that is occurring, right now. It's not conceptual or theoretical, and it's not even sort of alleged. We know that it happened because it was disrupted. The limitation is, you only know what you know. You don't know what you don't know. And so, an increase in seizure reporting might be more effective enforcement. It might be caused by, higher, better screening methods. It might be caused by a rise in trafficking volumes, for example, or it might be caused by, more attention, say, in the media. There's sort of an emphasis on a specific type of wildlife trafficking. So, to best facilitate this type of analysis, this illicit convergence analysis, you need consistent, detailed reporting across multiple types of illicit activity. And so, this is, customs press releases. This might be, social media accounts that follow these types of issues. This could be local reporting. But, whatever the venue, you need specifics on the product, on the route, ideally including the specific institutions or platforms or companies that are being exploited. The obfuscation method, and then any implicated entities. So that could be, an individual or, a freight forwarder or an account, but that has been, linked to the seizure and the trafficking. And so, especially when we start talking about financial institutions, financial crime, that might not be something that can be shared wholesale, but finding ways to anonymize the data or to otherwise bring in investigative or analytical resources into the work is going to be something that will be necessary for this type of sort of scalable illicit analysis.
And that's great. And to pick up on that, and also another question here from our audience members about, data availability, where do we get it from? And one of the real key benefits of collaboration, of course, is being able to share data, as you said, Ben, as long as it meets the legal framework in which we can do it. And one of the things that we're so proud of, that we try to do, of course, with the partnership with the Sentry as an example, is really to find alternative sources of data from many parts of the world where, public sources is not readily available. Even with our public sources, sometimes they can be not particularly reliable because they may be, leaning towards one political party versus another, depending on the jurisdictions that you deal with. So let me turn over that question to you, Sasha. How does the Sentry navigate through some, very difficult jurisdictions sometimes? And I'm sure, the people that you employ and the researchers that you use in jurisdictions, how do they go about making sure that they're getting and sourcing information in an effective way in terms of your process of identifying criminal activity?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for the good question, Jay. So, to answer your last question first, basically, we try to, as much as possible, to rely on documentary evidence, and we have a number of methods to verify and cross-check documents that we get. I think, for those of us with a background in human rights, and I myself lived in Central Africa for several years, basically talking to people and then turning those interviews and conversations into reports and data, that really is not good enough for most governments or financial institutions. So, we've been learning how to really get the reliable data that, would enable accountability and consequences for the illicit actors. So again, so making sure to get whatever documentation, whether it's photographic documentation or, contracts, databases from governments, a lot of which are publicly available, but just, nobody looks at them. Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative data, there's quite a lot in there. I will just say that, we have quite a number of staff who are on the ground in the countries that we work in, but who are essentially undercover because of for their own safety, right? So, if you look at anyway, so that's one point. I did want to get to your question earlier about the risk convergence. I think that this is a really important topic, and for years that governments and probably banks have been stovepiped in terms of like, okay, well, let's, look at Dubai, let's look at China, let's look at Congo, let's look at Colombia, like they're just, separate. But the reality is there are certain networks out there, many, that have operations in all of those countries. If we're only taking action against one, then, the network will just beef up in another place. And so those linkages are really important. Like some of the reporting that we've done has traced, the same conflict gold networks from Congo to Uganda to Dubai to Europe. It's really global. It's controlled by some of the same people, and that applies to the types of actions that financial institutions might take. Right. So instead of just asking, like, let's say you're purchasing gold, like the original country certificate, like look for the proof of payment and dig deeper. I think these conflict-free audits are a really remarkable revolution, let's say, to enable transparency in that supply chain. Utilize those so that banks who've been buying gold for hundreds of years, now actually need to be looking a little deeper and conducting enhanced due diligence when someone says, "Oh, my gold's coming from Kenya, no problem. Okay, we got a certificate. All right, fine, no problem." But like, how did that chain happen? What were the steps taken to avoid sourcing from illicit areas, et cetera. And then on the data availability side of things, there's a growing group of us, NGOs, so, all the groups on this webinar, but also the United Nations group of experts. They produce, 100-page reports every 6 months that I think are often overlooked. We are frequently passing on information from those to either governments or companies. Those can be taken advantage of as well.
Thank you very much, Sasha. And to turn to a few of the points that you made before handing it off to Roni to respond. Same as us, we're big believers on making sure that we educate everyone about the risk convergence point. And one of the things that we've been promoting as a company is a term what we call green crime, or the convergence of wildlife trafficking, environmental crime, waste dumping, illegal fishing, illegal logging, and that we have to think of it in a much more different way, in which the data convergence piece is incredibly effective in terms of showing how that works. And the second piece, of course, to your point, is how we collaborate better in a more effective way to actually educate policymakers as well, which is the reason why, of course, the Sentry and FreedomSeal and many others joined with us to form the Global Coalition to Fight Financial Crime. Really to engage with senior leaders to make sure that legislative framework that Ben spoke about is there and is conducive for us to move forward in a more effective way. And maybe, Roni, if you can speak a little bit about some practical measures that the FreedomSeal and how you are helping companies deal with things like modern-day slavery in parts of the world. How you're helping companies avoid enforcement actions in terms of reviewing their supply chain risk, and we're a data partner alongside many others that you have. So if you can give some examples in terms of how you help companies deal with some of the supply chain risk issues related to the modern day slavery and other issues as well.
Yeah. So as you know, I've been working on this issue of modern day slavery now for over 20 years. And we can see throughout the years, what tools have come into place that helps us to win this fight against human trafficking. And today, in today's world, we know it is data, and that is a critical element. So as far as FreedomSeal, as when we do our certification and as companies apply for the usage of the FreedomSeal, we actually have a great auditing team who reviews and helps companies to put policies in place. Right? We help you. Somebody had said, to crawl, to walk, and to run, because again, it's not overnight. But what we can do today is FreedomSeal utilizes the data that is available through our partnership with Refinitiv, as well as we have our own forced labor data sets that we've received over, in the years. Credible data, by the way, working with the governments around the world. When I did speeches at the UN General Assembly, working with 150 countries, we knew there had to be new solutions. There had to be new tools. So I created the FreedomSeal. I presented our three-step process to the UN and then to the different countries. And very specifically, what we can do is when a company, we can help companies to navigate this difficult things. Work with us. We're willing to work with you. And what you can do when you apply to work with us in the FreedomSeal, you can use our technology platform that will inside, it will give you the red flags of how do you identify forced labor within the specific country. So we use country risk. The products that's being made, we do a risk based on the products coming in and being imported into the United States. And so with the help with the Refinitiv, we use advanced analytics to gain visibility into the trade compliance area. We know today from talking with companies, it is very difficult to see past tier 1. Tier 1 is difficult as it is, but what about tier 2, tier 3, and tier 4 and down the stream? And we know it's difficult. However, FreedomSeal has created within our technology platform, an assessment to help you navigate that journey. And the big goal is to, again, avoid using anything that has to do with forced labor. So FreedomSeal Global, with our team here, we're headquartered in the USA. However, we work around the world. Our tool really is a collaboration of partnerships. Governments do have a lot of good data. I've been at the UN when they're, like Sasha said, when reports of 100 pages were distributed and put online. Well, it was good information, but unfortunately, people just did not read and have the time to read the 100 pages. So what I did with the FreedomSeal is that we took the data, some of it, and put it into a technology platform that is digestible, easy to understand, and then we give a very concrete action. So what can you do today as a company? If we are a financial institution, we have a financial certification, which is very targeted to the financial industry, helping you to avoid, money laundering. We know money laundering is an intersects, with human trafficking. So we work specifically within the financial institutions, working with governments, with suppliers who want to do the right thing, but they need help. So FreedomSeal Global can help your company to get ahead of the game. Again, be proactive versus being reactive. And that is where FreedomSeal Global is here to help you, to guide you, and join the journey and adopt the seal.
Thank you very much, Roni. And I just want to remind everyone that in the end, we have about 10 minutes or so. We'll be asking some feedback in terms of where, in fact, you and your company get your data sets from to be able to do your due diligence processes as well. So that would be great to get your feedback on that, and of course some feedback on the responses of the webinar itself. And maybe if I could turn to you, Sasha. I applaud the work that the Sentry has been doing in terms of engaging with policymakers specifically, and you note the successes that we've had in terms of having sanctions be placed upon individuals in sub-Saharan Africa specifically, and with a new administration, the U.S. administration, what you think the focus is going to be, what are the trends that companies out there should be mindful of as they're working through their screening process and the due diligence process. And certainly the word has been that there's going to be a lot more focus on human rights and labor rights and modern-day slavery. But what's your sense and how that's actually going to impact company due diligence, the next few years?
Yeah, great question. Well, I don't work for the U.S. government, so but I will do my best to give some analysis. I think that the action against Dan Gertler and the State Department press conference right after that was an important signal from the administration that they will be taking action against corruption, that they support the Global Magnitsky Act, which is up for renewal right now in Congress, and it does appear that it will get renewed. I think that there's some new opportunities around ESG issues. So, for example, strengthening enforcement of some of the existing measures that are out there. So Dodd-Frank 1502, for example, I think there will be some strengthened enforcement by the Securities and Exchange Commission. There was some efforts to repeal or suspend it under the past administration. This administration seems to be wanting to look forward on those issues now, especially that the SEC has a chairman in place. I think that there are new opportunities. There will be new opportunities for increased public-private collaboration on, for example, more global responsible mining as the administration looks at this issue of critical minerals and also on sort of green technologies and how do those issues interlink with mining. So, for example, if there's a surge in electric cars, which it looks like there's going to be over the next decade, that's just going to require more and more mining of rare earths and critical minerals. And so there needs to be more of an effort to source those critical minerals and responsibly. And so I think that that's an increased area of opportunity.
Yeah, and I agree with you. We've seen the same convergence of topics like ESG, environmental, social, and governance, with financial crime. On the environmental piece, of course, with a focus on wildlife trafficking by FATF and other policymakers, by Interpol, Europol, but also on the social part of the ESG, which is about labor rights, human rights, which very much feeds into the due diligence process. So it's not just the convergence of the topics, it's about convergence across the financial and non-financial sectors in ways that we certainly haven't seen before. And so, I would very much agree with that. And maybe there's a question here on, access data, whether you access data from financial intelligence units globally. We certainly do as a company, which gets into things like, how do you structure the data in the most efficient way when you're dealing with multiple languages, multiple formats. So maybe, Ben, if I could turn to you and your company in terms of, where do you get your information from the FIU's perspective, and how do you go about structuring that data in a way that reduces the noise and reduces the need for companies to access similar types of data in terms of how they do their case management. So if you can give a bit of perspective on that, Ben.
Sure. Yeah. So most of our work with FIUs has been in a training capacity. So working with them on the investigative side or acting as an investigative capacity for their priorities. What I can talk about for data collection and structuring is, a few different pieces. One is, like we said, developing that common ontology. That is, if you're collecting data, especially, even for structured data, but especially unstructured, thinking ahead about the different, fields of data you'll want to be collecting. You're thinking about it almost conceptually first, and then, pulling down the data and making sure that you're categorizing each field in a way that will allow it to be resolved with other pieces. Certainly creating a unique identifier for any entity, and then understanding how to resolve different data types. So say we've put a lot of work into creating a consistent standard for transliterating from various languages, Russian or Arabic, into English, so that if we have one entity that is say the English language name or transliterated into Latin letters of say somebody who's on a real estate listing in Dubai, if we find their name elsewhere, say on a Lebanese court record or a PEP list or something like that, that we're able to resolve those formally. We have had some experience using machine learning and natural language processing for flagging and sort of enriching these data sets. But I think especially what's important is making sure that the data that you have is able to be searchable and that it's resolved on entities. And so we've also done work digitizing data sets. So we've pulled in records from quite a few countries in Africa, to include the DRC, and been able to scan and use optical character recognition technology to create turn paper records that were not previously available online into a searchable data set. I can stop there, but I'm happy to go on about it.
No, that's great, and that very much is something that we're also, of course, doing. Which is not just the global coverage, but one of the things that we're also engaged with from a policymaking perspective is informing the AML reforms that in order to achieve interoperability between public registries, as an example, there needs to be more attention to making sure that the data and the formatting is comparable across different jurisdictions. And we know that this is a focus certainly in the European Union, and there's going to be quite a bit of focus on public registry specifically in other parts, including the US and in other parts of the world as well. And I'm just conscious of time. We have just a few minutes left. And I guess the last maybe comment to make, and maybe we'll get Roni's view on this before we conclude. How would you, recommend, why would you recommend for companies to really consider the FreedomSeal as a potential partner to be certified? What do you think the benefits are, and where do you see the FreedomSeal here in the next couple of years in terms of becoming a global standard? So maybe we conclude with you, Roni, and then I will hand it over to Karen, our administrator and leader here, making sure that we're keeping track on some of the administrative questions and feedback at the end of the session. So maybe Roni, the last word will come to you. In terms of why the FreedomSeal and what do you see the future of due diligence certification in the future?
Yeah, great. Thank you, Shay, and to all of our participants for this great panel. And as we go on with our day, as we're thinking about this panel, I think one thing we need to remember is utilizing data is wonderful and great, and we want to be able to do that because it is one of the best tools we have. But behind the data, there are real people who have been affected by the issue of modern-day slavery, such as myself. For that reason, I wanted to create an visual mark in the world, which is the FreedomSeal emblem, which then can be, the bigger vision is to be able to work with governments because our FreedomSeal has a global ID. Every single one who earns our FreedomSeal emblem will have a global ID. And that global ID will also help to when it comes to importing products into our country. We talk about the trade. So FreedomSeal works with trade compliance. We do look at the due diligence, and we want to help companies do the right thing through the due diligence. When you take that step of action, almost that step of faith, and sometimes it can be a scary world, but we got to take that step forward. Right? To move forward, we got to take those things that will advance our work. and help our companies to be successful. And then the bottom line, you do not want to be fined. Companies do not want to be fined with this issue. So FreedomSeal here is to help you to avoid some of those penalties. Our social responsibility, leads to, again, amplifying the voices in the marketplace, because the consumers will demand a change. And so let's do this together. That's right. And bring together collaboration. That's what the panel's about. Let's collaborate with all stakeholders, governments, law enforcement, survivors, all of us, companies, financial institutions, investors. We didn't get a chance to talk about investors, but we're also working with investors to where do you put your money in? So, but it does take this collaboration for us to agree there is a challenge here, but to move forward, what are the actions you're going to take today? We can give you very specific actions, and one is to, again, come to FreedomSeal, thefreedomseal.com website. We definitely will give you more information, as well as our other colleagues. Resources will be there to help you in this journey and to drive forward our efforts. So to conclusion, I believe when I created the FreedomSeal, it will be one of the solutions that will really help change the world and change millions of children around the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Roni, for that incredibly empowering conclusion. And I think that will conclude this panel. I very much encourage all of you, all the attendees who joined us, to visit the websites of the organizations that we have here and reach out to Roni, Sasha, and Ben. I'm conscious of time. I'm sure we can continue for another half hour to dig into some of the issues more specifically, but let's conclude with that. Karen, I will hand it over to you to ask to get a final survey started. But again, join me in thanking our speakers for an incredible presentations and insight. Thank you very much. Karen, over to you.
Thank you.
Yes, hi. Thank you again to our panelists, and thank you, audience, for your time and interest. If you would, please take a moment to answer the survey that we had highlighted on your screen, and you can also access it from that toolbar at the bottom of the screen. It's just 4 short questions, and we really do value your input and feedback. You'll be receiving a follow-up email that'll contain some of the resources and slides from today's presentation, and so keep on the lookout for that. And with that, I will conclude this event. I want to wish everybody a safe and good day. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.